What the hell? Dude. You got powers. Yes.
So we're back with Superman and Lois Season 4, Episode 3. This episode was insane. I was not expecting a lot of the stuff to happen that actually came down into it. Special shout out to Michael Bishop for doing one amazing performance when it came to portraying Jonathan Kent's pain. And this episode has so many surprises I was not ready for. In this video, we're going to be breaking down the episode part by part, talking about the two Superboys, the death of Sam Lane, and what's going to be happening with the rest of the cast. So with that, let's jump into the beginning of the episode where Sam is calling John Henry Irons and Natalie Irons to the DOD because he wants them to help out be the Earth's protector because now they no longer have Superman. And Sam also wants that serum that Bruno Mannheim used on his wife last season, but it was all to give Clark a heart. But we'll talk about that when we get to the end of the episode and break down that portion separately. However, this episode was amazing. And I love the way they use the flashbacks in this episode, and I honestly should have seen Sam's death from giving us a flashback, focusing on him finding out Clark's true identity and him not believing in it at first. And that's a classic Superman trope that people just don't notice that Clark Kent is Superman and then all of a sudden he takes off his glasses and it's like a light switch has flicked.
I'll be damned.
And I love how they kind of showed that this little simple thing that Clark does by not standing up straight, by having glasses and kind of giving that more dorkier persona, it makes people believe he's not Superman. And I like how they continued with those flashbacks, showing that Clark went to him for his blessing before getting married to Lois, but Sam didn't want it to happen because he was worried about his daughter, knowing that Superman has to go into danger all the time and that he never knows if he'll ever return. He has a job to protect Earth, and that would get in the way if he was married to Lois. And I love how Sam's seeing this as more of his duty rather than falling in love, even though this is a man who's very work-driven, working for the government, and his job is to protect the country, which they even dive deeper into later in the episode, where Sam finally gives in after hearing Clark talk about how he loves Lois and how he cares about her, and even his mom turned around saying, you don't need Sam's blessing, you get married to her because you love her, and it's Sam's fault if he doesn't want to be here to see it. And I love that all leads into Sam turning around to Lois and being like that he cares about his daughter. He sees the love that both Clark and Lois share and that he wants to walk her down the aisle because he tries to warn her about the fact that Lois and Clark are kind of like Sam and his wife, that they're both work driven, that they kind of have their own goals, and he's worried about how his life turned out, that he was worried his daughter would have the same kind of one, but instead it got flipped differently where Lois and Clark wanted Sam to be in their life. Clark wanted Sam to be brought in so he could feel part of the family and wasn't left alone anymore. And I love how these gave us these really touching flashbacks of him realizing about him coming back into the family and that what Clark and Lois gave him just for him to get killed. And that was the big thing about this episode, is I should have known from the flashbacks that this is what was going to come from it, because that's usually what they do in every show. They give us all these flashbacks and then they kill a character. But I thought that stuff was done really well, and the flashbacks were used amazingly, and I can't wait to see what's going to happen going forward now that Sam Lane is no longer with us. Let's trickle back to the beginning of the episode where we finally catch up with John Henry Irons and Natalie Irons because we haven't seen them in the first two episodes. And they aren't series regulars anymore, so I kind of feared that something bad was going to happen to them this episode as well. Just like how Sam Lane died, which he wasn't a series regular, so it kind of makes sense that they killed him off and why he's no longer a series regular. But I don't really know what they're doing with John Henry Irons and Natalie Irons at the moment, but it was great to see that John regrets not being there to help Clark fight Doomsday, and he feels like he should have been there. And they reference in this moment that there will be no more steelworks, and Natalie will not be able to go to that DOD school because they have to be the protectors of Earth because there's no longer Superman. And in the comics, steelworks is actually a thing. In the comics, John Henry Irons must bring Metropolis into the future while trusting his niece Natasha to carry out the Mantle of Steel. So he's building up a company in order to bring Metropolis into the future. So that was pretty cool to have that little reference to that. That's kind of where they were going to go this season, where they're going to go to Metropolis. John Henry Irons was going to have his steelworks in order to help people, and Natalie would have been steel. So kind of cool to see where they went into this. And I like the story as well, because when they were leading into them going to the DOD, they talked about how they didn't get the chance to save their world, so they're going to fight to save this one. And I thought this was a foreshadow of John Henry Irons dying this episode, but that wasn't the case. He survived, at least for now. I kind of fear that Doomsday is going to be killing off characters one after another just because they can. And when they do show up to the DOD, I love how they just kind of they already accept the job. They're there. They want to protect the planet, and they get the code name Steel and Starlight, which in the comics, Natalie actually has the code name Starlight, which that was before she eventually took on the code name Steel. So I thought that was a cool little reference. I didn't know that. I've only ever known her as Steel, so I thought it was awesome to see that. And in the comics as well, John Henry Irons doesn't have a daughter. It's Natasha, his niece. So, I mean, this is a switch up. We've known that since they introduced her, but it's still cool to see. And then when we meet John L. Jones, He's actually a character from the comics as well, who worked under the United States government and was later recruited to Task Force X, aka the Suicide Squad, under the command of Steve Trevor and Rick Flag. So cool little reference there. I couldn't find a picture of him, but I thought that was still cool. Now, before we get further into the episode, where we kind of get leading to the Doomsday stuff, like I said in the beginning of this video, shout out to Michael Bishop for having one amazing acting performance, because Jonathan blamed Jordan for getting Clark's heart squished. He blames Jordan for not being able to save his father, even though he knows where Jordan's coming from. And you can really see him snapping. It's a child who's mourning. He's broken. He was powerless to do anything, and he feels that. And I loved how he kind of freaked out at Jordan, talking about how Jordan was always just trying to be a hero, wasn't trying to save people. He just wanted to be in that spotlight. And now that his father's dead, he never gets to see him again. So Jonathan's feeling this pain because he's powerless. But that powerless is coming from a family of superheroes. He wishes he was able to do something. He wishes he could have done something. And then his powers finally awaken. We've been waiting for this for 4 seasons for Jonathan to finally get powers, and he does. And I'm hoping we get 2 super suits this season for the Super Sons, and it would be great to see them work together. And I'm going to call them the Super Sons. It's not exactly a reference to the Super Sons from the comics, but I think it's a lot of fun to kind of use 2 Superboys to be the Super Sons, because it makes sense. And the thing is, Jonathan is already a natural with his powers, which I'm kind of seeing it as the reason he's like this is because he was always the star football player. He was always kind of gifted with athletics, and Jordan was always riddled with anxiety. He was always the one having a harder time with his life, where that's why it was harder for him to deal with his powers. And he also got those powers like right after he found out his dad was Superman, so he still had to deal with all that emotion and everything else to having his parents lie to him his entire life. But in this moment, Jonathan has already learned about all this. He's kind of overcome all that because he's seen his dad and his brother run around using his superpowers, and on top of it, he had those powers when he was taking the XK back in season 2. He kind of gets it, and it's natural to him at this point. Which in this moment, he also talks about having all the powers already, which it took Jordan a little while to get all of them, and it's very interesting to see how Jonathan's powers manifested compared to Jordan's. Again, I still think it has something to do with the difference between anxiety and non-anxiety, but it was pretty interesting to see what they're doing with this, especially because now Jordan's going to be having that resentment with him because he was finally the star. He was finally not outshined by his brother, and now that's been taken away from him, where his brother is going to outshine him again. And it all ties back into what Lex Luthor set up this episode as well, where Luthor is playing Jordan. The fact that Lois picked to save Jonathan and not him, making one of the sons get angry at his parents, not trust them anymore, because Lois clearly didn't care enough about him, and he chose his brother instead, which the better option would have been she chose neither of them, so that it didn't look like she had a favorite. Now, this looks like it's Luthor manipulating Jordan, try to get a hold of him, control him, probably make him a dark Superboy. I feel like it's going to be kind of hard to do that after what he did this at the end of the episode, but that's definitely what it felt like they were setting up. Jordan kind of snapping, because after Lois goes to Sam, tells him about Jonathan getting powers and wanting to bring him to the DOD, and Sam even saying he's a natural born leader, showing that they want to train Jonathan. And my first thought is, what about Jordan? Aren't you going to train Jordan and Jonathan at the same time? Why would you only take one brother, not both? It kind of leads into how Lois regrets not telling the kids sooner about their dad and him being Superman, because they could have dealt with the powers so much easier, and they could have been prepared for it rather than it just being sprung on them. Also, the fact that Jordan is still mad at Jonathan about what he said, even though Jonathan apologizes for it, Jordan doesn't believe him, because that's actual feelings he felt. He was in pain, and there's still a little bit of resentment in there where you have the two brothers fighting. Eventually, they're gonna have to come together to be able to take down the bad guys, but at this moment, they're kind of divided until they can find peace, and it does not help that Lois divided them even more by her picking to save Jonathan. To be fair, she was right. When Jordan was getting mad at her for having a favorite, Jonathan is the one without powers, so of course she's going to save Jonathan. I mean, Jordan was the one dealing with Luthor at that moment, but she didn't know that. She just knew her sons were in trouble, and she trusted that the one with powers was going to be able to get out of it, where the one without powers was going to die. I can totally see where Lois is coming from in this moment, but as a person who has a sibling, I could also totally see it as her picking favorites and choosing one son over the other. Definitely a very tough situation, which both Jonathan and Jordan are going to have to overcome and come together, but I think it's just going to be a small thing where they're going to have a little bit of resentment from each other. They're probably going to fight. We're probably going to have a Super Sons fight at some point as well. Eventually, we're going to be seeing them team up and work together to take down Lex Luthor. I do really like Jonathan's call to action in this episode too, where he talks to Lois about how he wants to learn to be a hero, and he knows that's going to take time. He's not going to be his dad right away, but he has to help people. He needs to stop people from losing their families, just like how he lost his father. So it's that call to action where he wants to be the person that saves the day. He wants to save them, even though he knows, he understands, he needs training, he needs to know how to use his powers. It's not going to stop him from going to do it anyways, which is kind of the same with Jordan. Jordan did the same stuff. He went out and saved people, even though he knew it was risking his own life. But now that we went over all that, it's time to talk about that ending of the episode where everything kind of started to go to shit, and Luthor got his little grummy hands on everyone, because it turns out Jones is actually working for Luthor, because Luthor has his family hostage. Luthor knew how to get his way into the DOD, and he did it perfectly by using another soldier. But Sam still refused to give him the information about his daughter, and I'm actually shocked that Luthor was willing to kill Sam, even though Sam was the only one with that information. So I guess it was just his kind of way to hoping he would be able to get it quicker rather than doing more digging than he has to. I think Luthor messed up in this situation. I mean, Jones shot Sam by accident. He didn't actually mean to do that. It was a tussle for the gun. That happens almost every time we see someone struggle with a gun. Someone ends up getting shot. But I thought it was really interesting that Sam also used Bruno's theorem on himself. I thought this was him getting ready to get powers to possibly lose his life to take on Doomsday. I thought that's what was going to happen. And I totally thought that he was going to pick up Sam, fly away, and blow up where Doomsday would still get away. And Sam's sacrifice would have been for nothing, but it would have shown just how powerful this villain was. And I know from last season, Onomatopoeia had power, so that explained why she blew up, but I thought there was going to be a twist in fate here where something would have happened to Sam in the same way. We had Natalie and John versus Doomsday, where again, I totally thought John was going to die. Doomsday literally had him in his grasp, crushing him, but he got out of it, and I thought that was the moment that we were like, oh crap, we're going to lose John. That's going to be a very emotional moment. But instead, it was Sam getting killed by Doomsday, being crushed in front of his family because he knew what he had to do. However, I was not expecting his plan to be him getting taken to the Fortress of Solitude by John and having his heart be Clark's. That was a big shock because a lot of us thought maybe Doomsday's heart would have been Clark's, maybe something else. He might have been regenerating it, or Luthor didn't actually squish Superman's heart and it was a fake out to piss off Jordan. And he gave us that really emotional episode with his final goodbyes as he tells Lois that she was the best thing that ever happened to him, that he loves her with all his heart, and that he was closed off, set in his ways until Clark and Lois brought him into the family. And I thought this was like so touching. It was really emotional. God, I bawled my eyes out during this scene. It was done so well. And that's just another moment in this episode that just had great acting in it. And I can't believe what they're doing with the season. I feel like it's going to be a heart wrencher. There's going to be so many more moments that kind of crush us week by week. And I don't think I'm ready for it. But it was awesome to see that Sam sacrificed his own life to bring back Clark. Now, I will say at the end of the episode where Clark's eyes open, I was not expecting him to wake up so soon. It doesn't feel right. That might be a tease for a few weeks later where we do get that eventual thing. But I don't feel like we should be getting him back within 4 episodes of the season. I feel like that should be maybe closer to the end. However, it is a shorter season, so it does make sense that we're getting him quicker. And mostly because we did get episode 1 and 2 at the same time. It does feel a little quicker than it should be. But now that I'm saying it and rambling on, it does make sense that we might be getting him back by episode 4. What a great episode. So many good moments with some of DC references and comics. Plus, we got oh yeah, and speaking of that, we also got a reference to Chrissy and Kyle in this episode. I wasn't expecting that, but just a little reference about Kyle buying Chrissy a van. They might not be there, but at least they're still acknowledging them in the universe. Now, at this moment, I don't know what's going to happen next, but I think it would be great to see both Jonathan and Jordan get super suits. Now, when it comes to the super suits, I don't know exactly who's gonna get what, but I could totally see Jonathan getting the one like his Bizarre Earth counterpart with the leather jacket, just like how Connor Kent in the comics had. And then Jordan will probably get more one with the goggles because we've seen him with the goggles already, and that would be kind of cool lead into that. I mean, they could also go down the other Connor Kent route where he becomes more of a villain with Lex Luthor for a short time, where Lex Luthor uses him. And that definitely felt like what they're setting up this episode of him, Luthor, trying to separate Jordan from the family in order to manipulate him and turn him against them. But after he killed Sam, I highly doubt that's going to happen now. But again, you never know. Jordan's kind of unstable at the moment. He lost his father. He lost his grandfather. He found out his mom picked his brother over him. So he's got a lot of emotions going around where it could be easily manipulative. And I'm very curious to see what they do with him after this. Now, with this episode, let me know down in the comments what you thought about it. Were there any Easter eggs that you noticed that I might have missed? And what do you think is going to be happening with Jordan and Jonathan going forward? Do you think the brothers are going to turn on each other? Or do you think they might be fighting one another, then come together in order to take down Luthor and Doomsday? I hope you enjoyed this video. If you liked it, make sure to hit the like and the subscribe button. It helps out the channel a lot. And you get to stay up to date with all my Superman and Lois breakdowns. Thanks for watching, and I'll talk to you next week when we watch another episode of Superman and Lois.